Right. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. We're here for Liberty Worth's artist talk for her solo show Nuance, which is on view directly in the room next to me, Shoebox Projects. I know a lot of you have seen it already. If not, the closing reception is Saturday from 3 to 5. And you can also see Monica's work in the closet. So, which is about mindfulness. So there we go. So yes, and also Liberty, if you were at the opening, this is a good reason to come to the closing too. There's a new piece that, or not a new piece, but Liberty brought her piece from Studio Channel Islands. And it's like, I turned it on. I mean, I've had it off and on. So I turned it on today and Erica Lizet was here and I'm like, you have to see this. And so we were playing and every time I walk by it, I like touch it and make noise.
But she had to turn it off because it was singing to her otherwise. Yeah.
I was like, I think, and I know this is recorded, but I was in the bathroom and I like all of a sudden, like outside the bathroom, I heard this like alert, like you get the alerts on your phone, like child abduction or something. And it was like beep, beep. I mean, really loud, just like beeping. And so I go out, out of the bathroom and I'm like, I looked at my phone and I'm like, it wasn't my phone. And I realized it was her.
The artwork was calling to you,
Yeah,
literally.
yeah. And I'm like, at least it was during the day and it
Yeah.
wasn't like when I was sleeping because I was gonna have it on as a nightlight. But anyway, so yes, if you're just logging in, we're recording this. And it has been, I told Liberty, it has been, I mean, I told her before, it's been a pleasure having the work here. It's like when it came in, my blood pressure lowered like 10, 20 points. It is just so soothing and peaceful. And we had talked about it. We thought about doing a sound bath or a meditation or, having an acoustic musician come in. And like both of us were so busy that it just didn't work out. But at least we are able to do this Zoom talk and it's a thought for a future show, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
definitely. But you can always go again in Monica's closet on Saturday and for like more of the mindfulness stuff. But yeah, so um so let's see, just before we start, I'll share my screen and in just a bit. And when I do, I have pictures of the exhibition just in case you haven't seen it. And there's also pictures of each individual artwork and I'll kind of scroll through. But before that, for those who don't know much about Liberty or just want some backstory, I wanted to ask Liberty if she can kind of talk about her history as an artist and how that led into what she does now. So if you want to go ahead and start there, Liberty.
Yes. Well, I was born at a very young age. Not kidding. I I actually grew up in a family where my dad he's an industrial designer. And so I grew up around art and we talked about Eero Saarinen chairs. We talked about like those kind of things at the dinner table that I don't think everyone does talk about that at the dinner table. So for me, there was always an aspect of thinking about art even before I had any interest or any confidence really to become an artist. Um, I'm currently a part-time high school art teacher. I start up again on Monday. And one of the things I tell my students a lot of is that I never took an art class in high school. I didn't even take an art class until halfway through college when I ran out of art history classes for my art history minor. And once you too, that's so funny.
Me too. That's my story.
I don't know that we haven't talked about that before.
I know.
So I ran out of art history classes and thought, well, if I just take an art class, I'll have a little bit more respect for like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci for how hard it was to be them. I know I'm terrible, but at least I could, have some experience in like the act of making. And I had this art teacher who said, you have potential. And I was like, I don't believe you, but tell me more. I just was like, can I just get around this person who believed in me? And so I, after taking as many classes of his that I could. I started taking other art classes. I basically took all the art classes. And then I was a couple weeks from graduation, and I was walking in the graduation ceremony and realized if I was willing to go study abroad for a summer after I graduated, I could get a second degree or a second major. And so all I had to do was be willing to fail and make some art. And so I was like, sure, whatever. I'm very practical. And I was like, this sounds great. I could, it's an easier way to get a job if I have two majors instead of one. So I did that. I studied abroad. I had like a life-changing summer in Italy and got a couple classes taken, learned a lot about I learned about textile design there. One of the classes I took was a textile design class. And I came back and was really interested in textiles still. And there was a fax that came through back in the olden days to the art department that said, do you have anybody looking for a job after college? I was the only art major at that point who was looking for a job. Everyone else wanted to be baristas. And I was like, yeah, I'll apply. And it was a textile design job. So right out of school, I was dumped right into corporate America. I was a designer embedded in a sales team doing interior design type textile design. And I liked that process. I did not like how I was stuck on a computer all the time. I really hated it being in this like high tech situation where I was just like filling in dots. That part didn't bother me, like the filling in dots. It was just like staring at a screen all day. And so my company was really excited about, back then it was like 2000 or late 90s, early 2000s. And they were talking about being green. And I was like, this is really great, because nobody was really talking about it quite as much then as they are now. Only they would say they were zero waste, and I would go to the factory and I would see that, except I saw the sampling process. They were still going through hundreds and hundreds of samples. And I was always, even then, trying to find places that would take my samples, or could they do anything? And then I also was working with the other samples from the projects that I was on, little fabric samples that would come through, and everyone was always throwing away the fabric samples. And I remember just being really upset by this. I'm like, how can we say we're green? Like, I'm talking to people about LEED certification on building, which means you're super green, and you've done all these hoops you've jumped through to make sure that your entire process is green, but like everyone's throwing away all this fabric. So in this response to not wanting to be on the computer all day, and then this plethora of cool fabric tactile things I had that I was just taking home for the fun of them, I began just to sew with like needle and thread of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I did a little bit of this in, high school and junior high, but I didn't really know what I was doing as far as sewing. I just liked the idea of repurposing these things that I found were so beautiful. So that was where the textile waste thing started going around in my head. So that was like 2000, right around then. And at that time, I don't know that I ever would have thought I would move into being a fine artist. I think I always thought of myself as a designer, because that seemed more accessible a word. So it's taken a number of years for me to get to the place where I'm like, oh no, what I'm doing is art. And I think there's always that tension too when you're a person who sews, who makes art from sewing. I see Barb's on here. I know you can agree with me, Barb, but like, there's this tension of craft versus art, right? And I think maybe there's a good moment right now for craft, but for a long time it hasn't been. And I've been doing this long enough that I've been like, well, I'm just a quilter or whatever. I was making quilts. I started making quilts because of all the scraps I had around. And there was different types of projects that I had. There was a little bit of a fashion venture for a little while, and there's jewelry for a little while. And I did all these different versions, but the reality is that a lot of it left scraps, and I was like really upset about that. So I was trying to fit in the modern quilt world for a long time as a quilter, but I did not fit well there because I wasn't very minimalist, and they really, really like minimalists in the modern quilt world. And so my works never made it into the shows. And I remember taking that pretty hard, of like, why I know my stuff's good, but why is it never accepted by anyone? It just didn't fit the right aesthetic for that. I liked the people, but my work didn't find its place there. And so I had a real breakthrough when there was this moment where I was trying to capture a feeling I had. And I thought, could I do this with quilt stuff, even though it's really swirly and nobody's doing like these super swirly quilty things? And I made a piece that I didn't even know what I was doing, but I just made it and it didn't lay flat. Like quilters really want their work to lay flat and it didn't lay flat. So I mounted it and all of a sudden it couldn't be entered as a quilt anymore. And that was where I feel like I became an artist because I was like, this isn't a quilt anymore. This is just made with some quilting techniques. And now I want to make art. And so like that spurred on this whole little series behind me where I just had this idea of like, what if I made 50 of them? And then I made a couple hundred, and I had a really small studio at that point in time, so I couldn't make big work. So that's kind of the way I've landed where I am now. And a lot of what's happened is that once people hear that you're a artist who likes to use textile waste, they start calling you all the time. So now I never have to buy fabric anymore. Get called all the time. It's a little bit like a fire hose of fabric coming at me. And I'm sometimes like, ah. If I turned my computer around, you would just see rolls, which is scaring me right now. But it's a real problem. And I've become very much obsessed with the idea of textile waste and the fact that the more I looked into it, the more I realized it wasn't just something I saw as a little tiny designer and a little tiny cog in a big corporate machine. It's actually a very big global problem. And I care a lot about it. And so part of what I'm doing is trying to find ways to bring beauty from this stuff that is a problem that's in our world right now.
I love that. And it's brought me to a couple of different questions or
Yeah.
thoughts. I was thinking about it. I'm like, it could be interesting to get a grant for a warehouse to, and also employees, to be able to take in like the textile waste so you don't have to say no. So,
Yeah.
I mean, because that's the thing. It's like, when you say no, then where does it go?
I
It's still
know.
wasted,
And I have
right?
this huge guilt. I'm actually,
Yeah.
after we finish tonight, I'm driving over somewhere to pick up some stuff. And I'm just going, what am I going to do with this? But I can't let it go to this dumpster. It's going literally to a dumpster if I don't show up tonight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's probably all so gorgeous and,
Mhm.
just to think about how it's all made and yeah, so it's like, maybe, there's something there,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but, um, and then I mean, this is kind of more of a, um, I know there was another question, but I was just thinking about it in terms of your life in general and because of how your work is about textile waste, do you live a sustainable life? Do you like and I know this is, I don't know, this probably isn't the right question to ask for this, but in terms of how do you um in the rest of your life beyond your art, are there causes that you associate with that or I don't know, like I don't know what I'm trying to ask, if that makes sense, like
I
how.
care. I definitely care. And I mean, I think that if you do too much and you try too hard, you can exhaust yourself. So I look at the things that I feel like I can actually make a difference at. Like, I mean, I do try in my regular life. And I just signed up a couple months ago for Ridwell, who does a better version of recycling. Like I'm doing things, but it's hard, like I try to, when I buy my clothing, I buy a lot of used clothing. I'm really a big fan of like used clothing. I do clothing swaps with girlfriends. I make my own clothing a lot of times. I try not to buy into like trends as much. But I think I think the idea can be so overwhelming to try to do it all that I'm working at what I can do and the things that I know. For me, the word sustainable has a couple layers. I think it has this idea of like sustainable being meaning like good for the earth. And it also has to be a sustainable thing in my life. Like I have to be able to sustain that practice over time for it to actually do anything. So that's one way I look at it as far as sustainability.
No, I love that. And thank you for answering it that way. I think that's what I asked the question really badly, but I was hoping, like I've never heard of Ridwell. And so, just like tips and suggestions and stuff
Yeah.
like that for, that we can all take on, but also it leads to, and I think we've talked about this and I've talked about this a lot lately about like black and white thinking and like living our lives, oftentimes we live in a black and white society, but it's like, no, there's so much in between, and you just said that perfectly. So, in order like how we have to live or how it's okay to live, as best as we can in
Yeah,
that
well, we're
regard.
all doing the best we can do, right? Like you're also like, I'm trying to juggle being a mom of 3 kids and I live in Los Angeles and I'm stuck in traffic a lot. And I just had a very close family member pass. And, like there's all sorts of things that like I could try to figure out. Like I could be this perfect model citizen of certain levels, but I don't know how much of that is really going to be something that I could navigate on the long term. So I just focus on like, what can I do now? What can I do today? How, can I try to get to zero waste in my studio? I'm trying. I'm not there, but I would say like 90%, that's pretty, I feel pretty good about that. Especially considering I use fabrics, which a lot of people do throw away. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, let's talking about turning, this textile waste into beauty. Let's go ahead and look at your show and we can kind of continue the conversation as we do that. I'll go ahead and share my screen. And I know, like you and I had talked about it, and as you talk, and some of the influences and stuff like that, and if you wanted to share your screen, when we're done. But if you haven't seen the show, and also for the video, here's a couple of installation shots. This is Shoebox Projects. It's a small but mighty space. And I think Liberty's work just fills it beautifully. And Liberty and I hung the show and we, collaborated on where work was going to hang and it was very easy, very fluid. We had a great time and yeah, it all just came together so well.
Yeah, I think when I'm looking at it, I think it's fun to share a little bit about how this particular body of work came about. The black and white one that's to the right, to the very edge of the right hand side of the screen, um, is the first one I did like this. I have been playing around with like what happens if the tiniest scraps become paint instead of quilted type materials. And so I've been doing a couple in some really bright colors. I had recently done a whole booth at the other art fair that was super bright and had a many colors. And I think I was a little bit concerned about going from there to this and coming across as like rainbow lady, which is actually not really my aesthetic. I like very simple color schemes, but it was fun for the other art fair to have this big bright rainbow of colors to just attract things. But I had this black and white piece, and Christine and I were talking about like what direction should I go for this show when it was coming, and it was the first time I had ever put both a quilted piece and the scrap pieces together, and it felt like something that was very unique and new. And but when we were talking about it, I told her I'm wondering if I could maybe do it the whole show in black and white. And she reminded me of something that someone had told her was in school, right? That said, well, if the idea stands in black and white, then it's a really good idea. And I was like, oh, challenge accepted. But now I did get really scared when I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work. I definitely scared myself once I got in. So that was the first piece. The two in the center of this are really funny because the small white one was actually in the center of the other one. And I hated it so much that I cut the heart out. And which is why it ended up like an empty frame and I was agonizing over it. So I called it No Longer Heartless, that one, just because, because I refilled it. I didn't know what to do, but I really didn't like the way it looked when I did that. So I ended up with 2 pieces from that. And it was a really good experience. I think there was more than one person at the opening who said when they looked at that one in particular, they said, I really can tell you fought with this one and persevered. And I said, okay, thanks. So I think those ones are really interesting for that. Let's see, maybe go to on the other side of the walls. I had this rounded one has 2 quilted inset pieces into it, like another thing of just trying to play around with that. And yeah, so the other ones, a lot of them are just this idea of like what parts can I bring in of that show my love for fine craft, but also this like really abstracted idea of textiles as paint, which is where I'm going, right? I'm now that I had a big breakthrough when I discovered that if I separated my scraps into colored bags, then they started acting like paint instead of fabric. And so that was actually really exciting for me. It felt like I had a watercolor palette in front of me, just a really giant one, and I sit with a bucket on my lap, and I literally am placing each one. I'm not just like scattering them and then sewing it. That wouldn't work. I'm placing each one individually and wrinkling it individually because I like the like folding and twisting, and I'm doing that for each piece in order to create this texture and this vibrancy. What else can I tell you? Oh, I don't know. Do you have any pictures of the one? Let's see, there's that one. Yeah, the one in the corner is very long. That one, I definitely let it dribble on the floor after I went and saw the Ellen Etsui piece in London in the spring. I can't exactly do like 100-foot long piece, but this was my little homage to that beautiful piece that I got to see. The rope that's hanging is a funny one. Everyone who's come into my studio has been like, what's that thing in the corner that looks really ignored? And I'm like, don't look at it. It's weird. It's like this baby that I've had that I don't know what to do with I've been working on it for 2 years. It's actually, I think it's 140 feet long or something like that. It's really long.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's a little bit of the like mother of all these scrap pieces. So when I didn't know what to do with the tiniest pieces, I started literally making like sausage and like shoving them into this thing and making this long rope in sections. And I did not know what to do with it at all. It was a little bit upsetting to me, if I'm honest, just because I couldn't make peace with it, but I still kept working on it, which is like, I think that's a weird artist thing, right? Where you just keep working on something even if you don't love it. But what was funny was when Christine was like, I really want to have that piece. I really want to show that piece. Like it needs to come out from hiding. And so when we were talking about it, what is the casing? It is, it's like a tulle, like a real, it's multiple layers of like a netting. And there I have oh yeah, we can talk about, there, we can see that.
There's
you can see it a little bit better. Yeah. I had seen a truck a number of years ago.
You want to share your screen?
Yeah, I guess I can segue into that. Okay, and then again, I'm really terrible at screen sharing, so bear with me for a second. Let's see, how do I do this? Okay. I just got to find out now. I'll see if my thing will load screens. Oh, it's not even showing me any options, you guys. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
No, it's like everything is like unknown, like exclamation points. Okay, it's not working.
Okay.
All right, sorry. So unfortunately I cannot show the picture, but yeah, I don't know why it's not showing. Oh, okay. Well, a couple of years ago, I was giving a presentation about inspiration, and I like to talk a lot to my students, especially like when we go back to school next week. I will ask them, did you make any art or did you just collect over the summer? And I talk to them a lot about collection and that when you're not making art, a lot of times you are just absorbing information and absorbing things that come later. And so I was giving a talk about collection, and I had this photo on my phone that, like, during this horrible day on the 10 freeway, I looked over and I saw this truck, and it had this beautiful, like, figure eight infinity type shape of hose that was so remarkable to me. And it was right in the middle of all this like gross LA traffic, but I just kept looking at it. I thought, I have to get a picture of it. So I took a picture of it. And in this talk that I gave a couple years ago, I was like, I don't know what this is going to be, but this is an example of me collecting. I just collect these photos. I put them in a photo album, like for like inspiration for later. Or I have all sorts of different titles for all these different albums. And it did not really make the connection to this rope piece. I've been calling it a beanstalk for a while. And then actually Christine and I kept talking about it over the last few months. And finally she's like, Liberty, you've mentioned this truck 3 times to me. And she's like, I think we need to try to see if we can install it in that infinity symbol. So this is a little more flexible because we came up with some limitations on how we could install it, but I still feel like this is amazing to me that those ideas that sit there years earlier, that some random photo I took while I was on the freeway in traffic ends up manifesting into this piece of artwork that is really quite interesting. And a lot of people had a lot to say about it at the opening. I think I still was like, I don't know how I feel about it, but everybody else was like wanting to talk about it. And I think it's when you get up close, you're seeing things like buttons and pockets and little bitty bits of things, and you start realizing how many things would have gone in the trash, if I had not done that for that piece.
I love this photo because it looks like it's floating.
I
It's like
know.
you can barely see the chain. You can't see the chain here at all.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
even
and
know
I
where the
got a pretty funny stop motion of us trying to install it in different ways and then giving up and going for this chain option. So
yeah.
we were
Yes.
struggling with this one, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, we had fun installing. Oh, let's see. Here's a detail or a closer view of this one.
Yeah, that's right outside my studio. And it's weird how it blends into the wall so well there, but it makes it feel kind of on its own, which is cool. So this one is fun just because the longer you look at it, you can start to see a swirl in it, like there's a spiral that's really just made by how I make it. It was actually created as a part of me trying to come up with how will I do this interactive piece. So I was working with some gauzy, very stretchy kind of limp fabric, as opposed to other stuff have been using. It has some pretty heavy structure to it. And this one, Christina's even said that it's like settled a little bit on the wall. These pieces feel very alive because they don't lay flat and they kind of have some personality. And this one has this real airiness about it that's very interesting. I also started putting in materials that I previously have ignored. So there's some sparkly things and there's wool in there that's like from the center of a quilt, like the batting leftover scraps. And so they're kind of fuzzy, and I think that it's an interesting piece just because the longer you look at you, I think even in the picture, you can see that spiral showing up, which is really interesting. It's so subtle.
I think it's one of my favorite pieces in the show, if not my favorite.
Oh, I love that.
Just yeah, and it still is settling. Every time I walk by it, it just yeah, it just seems to be hanging differently somehow.
Well, and a lot of times when I'm installing these, I'm interested in like, what happens if we stick a nail and push this corner up and it has this like, bulge in this area. And so I'm very intrigued by that when I install these, but actually we did not do that in this
No.
installation, which was cool because it's great for me to see what they look like sort of flattish because they're still sculptural even when they're flat.
Yep, exactly. That's one of the things with this work is that it rides the line, blurs the line of so many things like you were talking about. I love the idea you're painting with fabric. I love the story. you know, and I think about it with this piece because I heard you talking about it with somebody that you know, each piece is placed specifically. And, you know, when you talk about that with color, that's one thing. But when you are doing like white
Yeah.
and beige, that's a whole other thing. But it, like this, looking at this piece, it just, like the composition, the tone, the color, I mean, it just works. It's very strong.
Thank
And
you.
so, you know, I think about it in terms of paint and in terms of interference and in terms of, you know, I mean, all of that in fabric. And so, yeah, you're painting with fabric and then it becomes a sculpture, you know, like Ella Natsui or, you know, or a tapestry, or I mean, it definitely rides the line between so many things, which I love.
Yeah, and thank you. I'm always thinking about like, can I put this in here and you still call it white? You know, like, can I put this yellow in here and then overall like I'm it's a lot of it is a color puzzle for me. And so the ones with the gradient, it's very like I'm going, what happens if I stick this one next to this one, but then I add enough texture that you're not noticing that it's not a smooth transition. And I keep, especially the ones like these that are these bright colors, I try to explain to people, I can't mix the color. I can't get the exact tone by adding more whites. I'm literally trying to mess with your eyes and say, like, if I put these two together, do you think gray instead of black and white? So for me, these these do scratch a little bit of a puzzle itch for me also.
Yeah, I love that.
You can see that here for sure.
Yeah. And again, I just love how this one lays too.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard for me. Thank you, Monica. I see that. It's a little bit hard for me to let go of this perfectionist like quilter, like it's gotta lay flat, the corners have to be mitered, like all those things. I've had to just release that and like let it be an impressionist work and let it be something that is not working at I mean, impressionists, I say that, and then I also want to be like worrying less about the impression I make and, and worrying more about the impression it makes, like maybe not worried so much about um like if people think I'm so skilled as much as like getting this idea across of like it's interesting. But coming out of a little I spent 10 years very much just focused on like trying to learn how to quilt. I also say I spent years learning how to unquilt too.
Yep. Yep. I get it. Absolutely. And this
So
is, I know the last piece that you did, the most recent.
yeah, so this one is a really great reason to plan your time well. I am again the like high school teacher in me. I tell my students all the time that a massive part of being an artist and being a professional is learning how to manage your deadlines. And I teach them how to make grids on the board and work backwards from their deadlines so that I'm like, this is the day you should be here by then and here by then and here by then. And I knew I had this coming up this summer. And I also traveled this summer on a very big trip to Europe for a week and a half. And I also have been dealing with some back issues. And so even still with that, I still navigated my time. I was just very, very intentional about my time and planning so that by the time I got to I got home from my trip in Europe, I had 3 days before we installed. And I on the first day I finished everything and I thought, well, this is great. I thought I could relax, but I'm not one to relax very well. And then I thought, that idea that I've been kicking around for 10 years, that one that I've been sketching out and thinking about, which is this idea of kintsugi, which I love the idea that kintsugi is this Japanese style of pottery where it's broken and mended with gold. And I love that. I think there's so much beautiful metaphor in it. But I've also thought a lot about just the idea that what if I looked at it differently and what if I thought about it from a fabric perspective, not mending with gold, but what if when we looked at what was torn and underneath we found things that were revealed were gold? There's a lot of like stories of like things in my life, I would say that where I feel like I've been torn and yet they've revealed better things that maybe wouldn't have come out otherwise. And so I've had this idea for many years. And to be honest, I don't know if I think any of the gold fabrics I had before were maybe a little precious to me, but I have all this donated fabric. And so I actually was like, you know what? I have all this fabric I've been given recently. So I'm just going to do this and see if I have time. And so this has about 7 layers of fabric that are layered from black through charcoal, gray, silver. There's like a gauzy white and then a gold, somewhere around there. And I went through, stitched up this idea, and then I just went at it and ripped at it for 2 days. I mean, I was up into the wee hours of the morning and working on this. And it was such a joy to have the time to work on something. I don't know if I would have given myself this time otherwise. So now I feel excited because, sometimes at the end of a show, when you've just worked so hard to get to a deadline, there can be a letdown of like, well, what next? Well, this is what's next.
Yay!
Yeah.
I want to see more of these, definitely.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And it's very cathartic to do too.
I bet. I bet. And I love that idea of it's almost like, erasure in a way, or yeah, there's, and it's definitely, it's not something I've seen. So yeah, I mean, do it.
This one's a little bit of a shout out to the one that I had recently that got lost in FedEx, which was a big sadness for me. I'm still grieving it.
Yeah.
Um, I did not get a receipt. Let that be a warning to everyone. And it never got marked as received by FedEx. So it was in many bright colors, but I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna like honor its memory by putting a black and white version in this show. So that was where the idea for this one came also. It's yeah,
And it's a beautiful piece.
thank you. It's actually bigger than the original red one was. So
Wow.
some things can improve, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this one was a little tiny one. It was the first one that got to be shown because I took it with me on my trip to Moldova, where I spoke to people about reimagining how they use textile waste. So speaking to young fashion designers who have their own lines there. And it was exciting to pack that in my suitcase and take it. They were so excited that they were the first people to see it. It was really fun to see what they were all doing too, to help with the environment, even in a little tiny country like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I just love that it traveled to Moldova and now it's hanging in my space here.
That's right. Yeah, it's a world traveler.
Yep. Yep. This is a closer up of the one that the heartless. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
no longer heartless.
This was a great one because a lot of times my son Logan, he's not an artist like me at all. He is a very different kind of artist, an extremely skilled artist, actually. He's in art school, but it's so great to have someone who knows your work. And my husband is not an artist, but he's a visual person and works in a visual way. And my son is an artist. And those are the two people I ask when I'm like, what am I missing? I need you to come over here and look at this. And Logan looked at this and he was like, you have to cut out the center, Mom. And I was like, hey, you're right. So it was kind of neat. I think that there's a great value in having people who can be kind of right there and just say the hard things to you about your work, and that you can take it well without getting hurt feelings over it.
Absolutely.
And there's the heart.
There's the heart.
Everything in this whole show was made with textile waste. So even the thread that I used was being discarded by, actually, because my husband works in TV, by the costume department on Westworld was getting rid of thread. And so even the thread was being discarded. And most, not all, but I think 90% of even the wood on the back of them that I mounted it with were also being discarded.
I love that because Monica's closet, I know there's parts of it that some of the pieces were used in like Star Trek, I think, right?
Yeah, in Star Trek Picard, they were getting
Yes.
rid of the all the shiny rolls of paper stuff, and my husband took it because it was like, I'm sure we're going to use this for something. And then I was like, I need something reflective, and he's like, I've got something.
Yeah.
Another
It helps to
layer.
know, and it helps to know production people in LA. That's
Yes.
Yes.
And another way layer of why the installations work so well together, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think this is the last one online here, one of the last ones. I'm going to show the video in just a second
Oh
of
yeah.
the other piece, but I just love, like you said, adding those little bits of color. And I love walking through and I see something different every single time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so fun. Even I do. I'll remember, like, I'll be sharing something and be like, oh my gosh, look, I'm wearing a dress that has that fabric in it.
Yeah. And then like spotting, like the elastic from masks, things like that.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, I was so grossed out by how people would throw their masks on the ground and I'd see them in the gutter. And I thought, this is textile waste too, people. Like you're part of it. And so it was like the grossest thing in the whole world, but I carried these doggy poo bags in my car and I would go and I'd pick them up and I'd be like, oh my gosh, and I'd flip it inside out and I'd like tie a knot. And I stored those for a long time. And then eventually I like tore the bags and threw it right into sanitize on my washing machine. And then even still, after sanitizing and drying on high, I put them in a plastic bag for over a year before I was willing to touch them. But now that I feel like they're pretty safe, I've started working with them. And I think that it's just a huge statement again of like what we are so willing to like ignore that we do.
Yep, absolutely. So I wanted to bring up, I'll show just a short video from Instagram. Let me see. Of the other piece that you brought um from Studio Channel Islands. If
Yeah.
you haven't seen this, hopefully you'll see it in person this Saturday. But let me see, where's the
Yeah. So this piece is a collaborative piece. Before the pandemic, in 2019, I was approached by someone who said, have you ever thought of putting electronics in your textiles? And I was like, no. And then he said, well, would you be willing to work with me? I was like, I don't know, I guess. And then we actually ended up doing a really cool interactive project that's in the Santa Monica Children's Museum called the Cayton Museum. And kids go up and they touch it and it sends out healing sounds and tones and lights. And we had just toyed with like, let's play and do some more because we had so much fun working together. I am not a tech person. I am low tech. He is very high tech. He designs playgrounds for like therapy playgrounds for children. And he works with Casa Colina and has some wonderful things he's doing. But we found that we did a great mind meld when we worked together. And so I asked him recently, would you want to do this another project with me? And so we were invited to submit a piece for this other show called The Arcade of Hypermodernity, which basically we had 6 weeks to come up with this. And so we sort of were thinking about it like a little outer space mushroom or something, but the idea was to incorporate play and light and the tactile nature of what I like to do together. And so we created this. It has multiple different sounds. It's an instrument and there's a computer inside, but the goal was to make it look as not to make it look as low tech as it like as Jason always uses the word elegant. He's like, I just want it to look elegant and not like there's wires all over, even if they're on the inside.
I know. Oh, that's fine. I think I know there's probably another one from
Yeah, that one might work. Well, let's see. That's a little video of how it came together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, where I was sewing that white piece and then we put all these things together, figured out how to fit some 3D printed parts together, LED lights,
Oh,
and then yeah, if you have the sound, if you hit the little sound button down in there, probably hear
oh,
maybe. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, so that's what it looks like on the inside. Not quite as like, it's interesting to see how it all came together, but lots of low tech and high tech really mixed in to make this piece happen. And it is so much fun to play with.
It is. It is. I love having it in my space. I know, well, it's probably farther down, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You'll just have to come in person,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, cool. I think we've looked at the show. I don't know if there were any questions let's see, I think they were asked or answered. You answered them. Um, let's see, any last thoughts, Liberty, or does anybody have any questions? Susan.
You're probably going to hate me for this one, but my Virgo is showing, and I'm curious about, especially like this instrument with people touching it, cleaning your pieces. I mean, we all know that three-dimensional work and whatnot gets dust. I mean, I've had it with my own work that was hanging up, and I walk by and I go, oh my God, what is that? And it was dust that had collected on it. So I'm curious if a collector or anybody wanted to buy a piece of your work and hang it on their wall. Do you recommend any ways to clean or dust, or are they washable? I mean, I know these are like sacrilegious questions, but I am curious.
I mean, I have a couple. I have one of the scrap pieces hanging up at my house. And one of my intentions is to just take it down and like take it outside and shake it like they used to with rugs. When it gets that way, because I'm using fabrics that would not do well with washing. When I make a quilt, I make it like so hardcore that like throw it in the wash, throw it in the dryer, do all the things, absolutely. But with the scrap pieces, you know, in the olden days, they would take them out and beat them against a fence.
And that's what I mean. Yeah. I was just thinking about rag rugs, okay? But you would see these pieces of fabric sticking out.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, you would shake them and beat them, and, you know, but this is art, obviously. But I also know it's like that practical part of me. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, well,
how would I clean it?
They're pretty hardy. Like I'm sewing them really densely, so I'm not really worried about giant chunks falling off if it got like shaken around at all.
Right.
Like
or even a gentle vacuuming or something.
Yeah, with a really gentle type vacuum could probably work.
Right. Sorry, but it was on my mind.
Okay.
Good question. Good question.
And the other question, Liberty, is do you work with wallpapers at all?
I do. So yeah, I do. I'll put them in there. I get a lot of vinyl samples and wallpaper samples, anything that my sewing machine will sew through. And to see the other question, Katie, you're asking what kind of machine. I don't have like an industrial machine. I work with a right behind me. It's a Janome, and it's kind of like a Juki, where it's a straight stitch machine, and it has a little bit more of capability than say like the $200 machine that a lot of people buy like on Amazon. But it's still considered a home machine. It's just a heavy duty home machine.
And also leather upholstery samples. Do you ever work with? Yep. Okay.
Yep. Oh, Darlene, I see that. Thank you. I like that.
Now I know where to get. Now I know where to give them to.
Oh, there's that grant.
I
know you gotta help me write a grant now, Christine. I think I need that.
Yeah, because I have a niece who works at the Pacific Design Center for a designer, and they're always, she goes, oh, I have this roll of wallpaper. I'm like, well, don't throw it away. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I take a lot of wallpaper samples to my students, because I just give them like, these are your materials. What are you going to make with it? So they come up with great stuff.
No, I would love for stuff like that to get to good use for sure. Okay.
Totally. Right.
I have a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you went to London and saw the exhibit of Ellen Sway. Is that how you say it?
Ellen.
Can you talk about your feelings there, and how, like, are there things you took away from that?
Oh my God.
You're bringing into your work?
Yes. So, well, okay. So I'm a mom of 3. My kids are like late teens and 20 and then almost 20, and then I have a 10-year-old. So I'm in the thick of it. I've also fostered 4 kids in the middle of that too.
Oh, wow.
I have not allowed myself to want something in a very long time. And I started seeing the images of that particular piece, and I was like, I'd be on my computer, like looking at the screen, exclaiming. And finally, my husband was like, "You need to just make this happen." And I was like, "Can I?" You know, and he was like, "Yeah, just do it, just go." So the first day when I got there, and mind you, I've been in excruciating back pain since March, and I traveled by myself, terrified that I was going to be like, how can I do this with my back pain? I have to see this piece because it's 100-something feet long, hanging in the turbine hall at Tate Modern, which there's not places like that in the world. There's just that place. So I knew I'm not going to see this thing in this way ever. Like if I don't see it now, I'm not going to see it. And so I just decided it was worth it, and I wanted it. And I was, like my husband made it possible for me to do this. And so I just went. The first day I went and I stood there and I was like, I have traveled so far to see you, like I can't believe I'm here. The second day though was a little bit, yeah, let me see.
I got it. I'll get it.
Thank you. Thanks. The second day though, Barb, I cried. I just I wept standing there thinking, I have not let myself want anything. And to have given voice to something like that was very vulnerable, to allow myself to want something and then to have people in my life that made that happen. I was overcome with gratitude and with just a joy that I was in a space that I could do that. So a lot of my year has also been taken over by my brother-in-law passing from ALS very quickly. So from January to June was all the time we had. And so I've been very aware of like the limitations on our days, and how many days I have left. I have no idea. If you had asked me a year ago if Dave was going to be around, I'd say, yeah, of course he was, but he's gone. And so when I think about that, there's all of those emotions were coming into seeing this beautiful piece of artwork that is truly about like repurposing, making beauty from garbage. And then like on a technical level, it's also amazing, right? So that's like the personal aspect of it, but the technical level is the scale of this piece is outrageous. I mean, we're looking at bottle caps. And the piece is so massive, and there's 3 pieces. There's not just the one. The one is the black one that I'm thinking of, but there's also this giant yellow and red one that has multiple layers. And like, I love the dedication to the abstraction that Ellen Etsui has. I do like, he has bigger messages about the transatlantic slave trade and about the way that the sugar was traded, and then it made the alcohol, which goes back and forth. And so he's talking about a lot of things, but he's also taking trash and making beauty. And so there's like so many layers to what he's doing, and I just admire him as an artist so much. And I admire the scale because I don't think on a big scale like that. And so seeing something that is that big, and it was really amazing. I mean, I visited it 4 days in a row. Wow. And I just with it. I've never done that before. I mean, I could not get enough of that thing. And I was just flying through London on our way back from Moldova, and I brought my husband in just to see where it was. I know it's not here anymore, but just imagine it was like right here.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a huge thing. It was a very important thing for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe your black and white was birthed from that, because he's not using the whole rainbow of colors. It's, red and gold or whatever the color the caps are. He has maybe 3 colors in his pieces.
And most
so
of
that,
my work
that might have...
tends to stay in the 3 colors or less. scheme
Mm.
most of my work does. So I mean, it might be another reason why I'm naturally attracted to him. I'm just really into his work, and the way that each time it gets installed, it looks different. So whoever's curating has the option of installing it differently, which
Oh.
I think is a really beautiful thing. The pieces never look the same when you see them installed one place and then there you see it in another place. So there's something really
Wow.
incredible about that. It feels very living.
Yeah,
And that is definitely something I seek to emulate.
that's cool. I didn't know that about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, so now I see a social practice work coming in where you collect like textile waste, you don't say no, and you like have the community come in and create, like smaller pieces that you put together in one giant piece on that Sui size piece.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
there you go.
I'd have to quit my day job to do it.
I
We'll
know.
see.
One day, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Liberty? Juan, good to see you.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good.
Yeah, I do have a question because I'm starting to be I'm in the process of starting to be a regular teacher, and I was curious about your practice combined with your teaching, and if you have and if you already said it, excuse me. If you use have you allowed your students to participate in your practice in some way, in collecting or in fabricating
Oh,
in your practice?
yeah, that's a great question. To certain extents, a very little bit. I do try to, it's funny, when I was in school, our teachers didn't show us their work. It was very like mysterious of like, I don't even know what kind of work he does. He's an artist, but now the kids find me on Instagram and I don't follow them until they graduate, but they follow me. They know what I'm doing. So in a drawing and painting class, they're like, are we gonna sew? And I'm like, why are you asking this? This is beginning drawing and painting, but it's because they know who I am and they're finding out what I do. So I find my students have a very high interest in the materials that I use. And I also, again, bring in lots of weird materials that are like, hey guys, what do you want to do with this? So there's a little bit of that happening. My favorite thing that I get back from the kids is the conversation about art history. So a really good example is that I had this one conversation with a student one day, and I was like, well, like with Kandinsky, how he used the circles with the different colors and he layered them. Like, why don't you start that? Like, but do it with a collage of something. And then that same day I got to my studio and I had a project I was working on, and the solution to that particular idea was actually stacking circles of fabric. And it came because I had already been thinking that way. So I find that the art history aspect and the information I'm speaking. So I will say I have very strong boundaries between school and here. I work only in the mornings at the school, and I start very early, and then I do 2 class periods, and then I leave as soon as possible, and I run over to my studio, and I don't do all the extra things that they want teachers to do. Like, the teachers get pulled in. There's a lot of free labor that they want. And I have very strong boundaries, and I tell them I have a studio where I pay rent and I have customers, and this is my job. So because of that, I make sure that I'm always remembering that I'm an artist first, and then the teaching comes out of that, and that the kids are actually benefited by me having this professional artist life. And they know that, and I show them that. And I'm like, okay, so somebody in your class just offered to buy that painting, but they offered you $20. How many hours did you spend on that? And then they're like, oh. So I talk to them a lot about things like that. I talk to them about valuing their work. I talk to them about how to present it. If someone asks them for a commission, I give them I'm like, oh, look at this. Your advanced art curriculum actually is what you would do for a proposal. So I've set things up so that the kids can move straight into being a professional artist if they want to. Most of them are never going to do that, but if they want to, they have all these tools. And we work on our presentation skills, and we work on like how to talk about your work and use art terms. And so those are where I think that shows up. I can't really have them help me with my work. I feel like ethically that's a little bit of a gray area I don't want to cross. Although the ones that cannot have taken as many classes as they can take with me, whether they've graduated or not, they're eligible to like be an intern for me. So I've done that for a couple of them. Yeah.
We have Susan, but also Monica asked in chat, what is your dream project you want to do one day?
Oh my gosh, I don't know, Monica. I'm gonna have to think about that one. I don't really know. I just had a crazy corporate project this week that was not necessarily my dream project, but it was like dream budget. So I would like to do my work. Actually, if I'm honest, because of my years as a textile designer, I actually really love collaborative work where I'm like working with a customer and doing an installation and working on a team of people piecing things together, like for the Children's Museum, or even like this project I did earlier this week. I really like that. So I feel like that makes me somewhat unusual as an artist, because I like corporate kind of, not corporate necessarily, but I love working with designers, and I love working on a big project that involves like a lot of different people. So that's kind of something I like. I don't know if that's my ultimate dream, but I do like those. And I like getting my rent paid for.
My question's really fast, Liberty. What age are you teaching, and where are you teaching?
I teach in Santa Monica at a private school called Pacifica, and I'm teaching 10th to 12th graders.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question if that's okay. Well,
Sure.
can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I love everything about your art. I did a little bit of like cut up swatches once for art, and it was just really rewarding to do because they had been discarded and I was making art with them. So I just think everything you do is beautiful. And I commend you for 10th to 12th grade, because that's what I used to teach for English, and that is hormone crazy. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And now, because for all of a sudden I forgot my question.
Well, you're coming on.
No. Oh yeah, I think wait. It had to do with learning from you. So when I remember it, I'm gonna DM you, Liberty, because
Okay.
I'd like to pick your brain about something as soon as I can remember what
Sure.
it was. There's a reason I was off camera. I'm really sorry.
Have another
I'm
hit
in
off
another
of that
world.
joint.
Yeah. I only wish I
Well,
could use that as an excuse.
come on
Anyway, this is
Saturday.
going live.
The closing reception is Saturday.
I am coming on Saturday. I will be there
Okay.
Saturday.
Okay.
I'm planning to be, so I have it on my schedule to come. Yeah, hopefully I'll remember by then.
3 to 5 on Saturday. Thank you everybody so much for being here, and thank you Liberty for sharing so much. It was such an inspiration to hear, some of the backstories and your teaching techniques and everything. So thank you.
Wait, I remembered. Liberty, is it okay if I contact you about textile design? Because it's something I've always wanted to do, and I have no idea how to even go about it. Would that be okay if I
Of course.
hit you up about that? Cool. I remembered.
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you guys so
Yay.
much for coming. Thanks for taking the time. It means a lot.
Thank you, Liberty. Thank
This
you,
was
Kristen.
great.
Hope to see you on Saturday.
All right.
It was
Okay,
wonderful.
Alrighty.
Have a great night.
bye,
Take care,
guys.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow, Liberty.
I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. 3 o'clock, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.